Hey,
Hello, everyone.
hello. Hey,
So when's the last time we saw you, Jasmine? When did you play with us? 2017
Oh,
or
I can't hear you very well. I think you asked the last time.
oh, how's that? Yeah, I just asked
Oh,
when
that's
was
better.
the last time you played with us with the GVO?
I think, well, I know I played there most often in like 2016, 2017. I probably played probably 2017, maybe 18. I'm not exactly sure, but
Yeah,
around that time
no,
frame.
definitely. It's not that long ago. Okay, my
Yeah.
internet. I mean, that's just why I was having trouble logging on before. But I'm in the right. I'm using the right router. Okay. Oh, damn! Something just happened. Sorry, guys.
It's okay.
I hear
I
you.
hear you.
Hmm.
Anyway. Link on the dialogue. Maybe I pressed something wrong. Okay, there we are. Anyway, so for those of you who don't know Jasmine, she is a wonderful oboe player who auditioned for us as a sub and played at Daphnis, and I don't know what else. I'm just picturing Daphnis. But you have no idea. Doesn't matter.
I
Same
remember Don Juan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same right. So that was back when we were in the hall, and of
Yeah.
course we've been pretty much on the road since then, believe it or not. But um, I just want you've been doing all sorts of interesting work, and I really appreciate your talking with us and about what we can do to uh, make our music making as relevant as possible. That's how I see it. And for folks who are tuning in, I really want to hear from people either through chat or at the end. We'll make sure we have time for a Q&A at the end to see how people are feeling about everything that's been going on in this country. Have you been in France? How long have you been in France?
I was here from August to late November, and then I had to go back to the US for visa stuff, and I came back last month, December 20th. But
Yeah.
before then, I would come here like on
Okay.
tourist visa. Yeah.
Okay. No, I only asked because I
Yeah.
just wondered if you were, here through this incredible year that we've had here, this dramatic and, tempestuous year.
I was here during the summer when everything, yeah.
That part at the seams, yeah. Um, we have a kind of general outline of questions, and we were going to begin with Cindy talking about your background because she knows you the longest. So I want to turn it over to Cindy now, the first section, and then we'll move on to Sam. Sam is going to talk about repertoire, and I'm going to talk about community engagement and sort of the big picture. So why don't we go to Cindy?
Hello.
Hi, Cindy.
Hi,
For those
Jasmine.
of you who don't know Cindy, she is a wonderful violist who played with our orchestra several years. She was co-principal viola, and she happens to be Hui Wan's daughter, but that's not her only claim to fame. And then she went off to Eastman and got a master's and is in the New York area and has been joining us online, which we're very happy to have. So go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah. Okay. So, Jasmine, I think everyone would love to hear a little bit about your background. When did you start playing oboe? I know you didn't always play oboe. And kind of what was your route becoming a professional musician?
Well, generally, I'm from Queens, New York. Started music, really started music in middle school band, but I took violin lessons when I was 5 to 7 years old. My mom's idea, but I did love it. I just don't remember why it stopped. And then I didn't play music from 7 years old to 11. Then I played the flute. And then in high school, which is where I auditioned with the flute, an oboist and a bassoonist was needed for something. So I volunteered and I stuck with the oboe ever since. Yeah. Oh, actually, what really inspired me from the beginning, when I was 5, was PBS. I was watching PBS and I saw an orchestra playing, and I said, I want to be part of that. I don't know how, but I want an instrument. So that's why my mom chose the violin, actually. Yeah.
So, how did you get from high school, just starting out on oboe for real now, and then where did that lead you along the way?
I think high school is where I really decided that I wanted to pursue it professionally, pursue music professionally. I had a really inspiring oboe teacher, Jim Farolo, and he, well, he kind of just assumed that I would start music professionally, and I went with it, but it was all for the best because I never questioned it. And like ever since taking my high school audition or LaGuardia High School audition, where I had to like really prepare and pace myself and basically take everything 10 times more seriously to play for a jury, and it was my first time doing that. I realized that's like a big part of the professional world, and I was prepared to do more with that and take auditions because I wanted to play in ensembles. And um, yeah, so after high school, I went to SUNY Purchase College. I found a really great teacher there. Um, and actually, it was like it was two really great teachers because one, I auditioned for Burt Lucarelli, and he retired, kind of passing me on to James Austin Smith, and it was also his first year at SUNY Purchase, and we formed a great musical relationship, and it was just what I needed because I was technically an oboe beginner at the time because I had only been playing for about 2 years, but in oboe world that's like 5 months. So um so yeah, I just had really supportive teachers from the start, and I loved playing the oboe, and I found it more to be my voice than the flute or the violin. I don't know why, but yeah, I just did.
Then, yeah, gotta, I mean, more alto power on oboe than flute. So,
Right.
you know. Okay, and so from Purchase, I know you went on to get your certificate at Queen's College at the Aaron Copland
Mhm.
School, which is
Yes.
the time when you were playing with GDO and me too. And then from then on, we both took our audition at Eastman together,
Mhm.
which is where we got our masters. Do you feel like you had any other really significant experiences with the teachers or just people in those schools that kind of helped shape more ideas of what we're coming to talk about, which is your organization, Black Classical Music Educators?
Um yeah, well, I realized that although I really enjoyed studying with my teachers, they were all white male oboists, and I did receive a lot of support from them, but there was always something missing, and that I couldn't identify with them in many aspects, and they couldn't identify with me. Like for them, they could just play music, and I even had one of my teachers, my undergrad teacher actually. When I was dealing with something about race, and he said, "I wish you could just play music." Like, not saying that I should just be quiet and not worry about these things. He was saying it in a supportive manner. But then I was like, yeah, that's just it. Like, you can just go to rehearsal and people automatically give you the respect. Whereas sometimes I have to earn it. Like, I have to earn it, and it takes way more time. And that's when I realized that these people who don't look like me won't understand what I go through, no matter how much they love and support me. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, totally. So yeah, so you kind of hinted at this idea of like representation within your teachers and
Mm.
yeah, so can you just tell us how why did you, I mean, you kind of gave the why of why you founded Black Classical Music Educators, but how do you see the organization combating this issue and representation in
Mhm.
classical music?
Yeah, so BCME, Black Classical Music Educators, is it's a website that I created to highlight, well, first to connect students with Black classical music educators, and ideally, initially for representation. So while any student can study with an educator on the site, it was meant for Black students to find representation. Um, and also, it's to highlight these educators because that's not always the case where they can find recognition, because a lot of the times only a select few people who happen musicians who happen to be Black are represented and are hired for certain things. But here for BCME, it's an educational tool, not necessarily a music school, but as long as the person is eligible and interested in teaching, they can be on the website. So it's less competition and it leaves more room for its purpose to connect students with the educators.
Nice. How has it been just since it's
It's
been
been good.
founded? Yeah.
Yeah, it's been good. We're on social media and I do intend keep to keep posting soon, but as for the website itself, and I'm actually going to be adding someone tomorrow.
Nice. Have you gotten any feedback from either teachers or students on what the
No.
resource has done for them?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry. What was that last part?
On what the resource has done for them.
Oh, yeah. So for example, one of my friends, actually, she's a bassist and her little brother is a violinist, and he found a teacher in LA. They're LA based, like during the first couple of weeks, and already she says that like it's so much more pleasant. I don't know who he studied with before, but it's so much more pleasant to have a teacher that every part of being a Black musician. So I hope that is the case for everyone else.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Well, I think I'm gonna pass it off to Barbara or Sam. Either of you.
Strictly going by our outline, I should go next, so that's fine.
Mhm.
How come I want to see? Yeah. Okay. Good. Right. So, actually, I was just thinking of a few things while you were talking about your website, and yeah, what do you do if? Just to follow up a little bit on that, I imagine you background check some of the teacher. Do you feel like responsible for those teachers and if they're good and if they behave and everything that somebody who's an administrator at a school goes through? Do you feel like you have to go through that too?
Not exactly, because so the way it's essentially more of a database. Um,
Yeah.
it's by location and instrument, but it's really a big list of people that you can study with. So I'm not involved with any of the material that they teach, as long as it's classical, because although a lot of the other educators they teach jazz and other genres, I really think it's important to focus on classical, because that's where we see the least representation. And I want students to know that, yeah, Black people play classical music too. we can play Beethoven and we can play Ellington. But so yeah, I'm not involved with the material aside from saying that it should be classical, and I'm not involved with transactions. But I do require that they have a bachelor's degree. So I check resumes.
Yeah. So it isn't like you've gotten some outraged parent calling up and saying this teacher is
No, no,
yeah, that just
they take care of the rest.
yeah, that's great. So yeah, goes very much into where I wanted to start, which is that when I was sort of coming up in the early days of my life as a professional musician, the idea of any kind of initiative was absolutely left to certain types of people, to executive directors at orchestras, conductors, deans of music schools, and I think that started to change even a few decades ago. But tell me about how you think the role of musicians who don't have a title like that after their names. Do you think it's changed now, or really it's up to everybody to work on this?
Right. I do think it has changed, because there are a lot of ensembles, for example, where they they want for everyone to have some administrative role, and usually these people come from different backgrounds, so um, that should help. Ideally it should help, but also I know there are still orchestras where some people don't even want to play community concerts, for example. So there are still problems, but I do know that there are groups that want to fix this, and I also just think that it's all of our roles to to do something other than just play our instruments
Right.
and stay in a practice room all the time, because it's still our world. So it shouldn't just be the role of people who aren't white either. It should, in terms of like race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So yeah, I think it should be everyone's role, and it's getting better, but not everyone is doing something.
right. I mean, in my day as an assistant, the weeks where we would do, they were called outreach concerts, which is it's sort of an
Right.
old-fashioned, but those were called junk weeks. That's just a junk week. Like it's not. That's just what it was called. By the
I never
musicians.
heard
Oh,
that.
oh yeah, totally. It's a junk week. It's like pops and kitties or whatever it was. Because it wasn't because the next week, the music director's coming back and we're playing a Bruckner symphony. Which is where you're
Right.
feel like your life's on the line. And I think that's changed. I mean, I'm talking. This is early 1990s, um, and I'm not remotely trying to judge my dear colleagues from that time. It just, it's a hard. It's as much as everyone wants a big job, it's a hard life. And you work a lot, and suddenly you're schlepping somewhere and doing a concert in a terrible hall and all that. So I think that's part of the mentality that we're working on, to empower
Hmm.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Um, I think that so one thing we talked about is that community engagement, social activism, these sort of go hand in hand, um, but it's not always a clear relationship. If you I've often with GVO, for example, you guys may or may not notice I have a little less lately, like a lot less lately, but for years I was very careful to never be political from the podium because I felt I'm here to do music. If I have a Republican sitting here or in those days we didn't have Trump supporters, but I just didn't want, I felt that we should be able to come to a rehearsal and play music. And if you happen to have different views than the music director, or that shouldn't make you feel bad. It should be an equal place. And I don't, I mean, lately I just can't contain myself. So as these guys know, I just say things, but we're still careful. So do you think that fundamental difference sort of needs to be worked on? That music world's one thing,
Mhm.
the world's another.
Yeah, I do think that needs to be worked on, because the music world is part of the world. I mean, it sounds basic when I say it out loud, but I mean, I we don't change just because we're in an orchestra pit or in an on stage. There's racism that goes on in rehearsal. So,
Tell me about that. Tell me about what that's like.
I mean,
Moments that
in what sense?
I don't know, any a vignette, something that you recall that's been tough for you.
I we have a bunch of specific
Yeah.
trauma, but I play my instrument as well as I do. Not saying that I'm the best, but they're expecting me to be a lower level than I actually am. Um, and some a small instance is me talking to a colleague who's also black, and someone saying, "Oh, well, you shouldn't both be speaking to each other." Like, just there are small things that aren't small. They consider them small, the aggressors, but that's just the thing. Like, those happen so frequently, and there's a wide range of these aggressions. I don't want to call them microaggressions because they're not, and that just becomes the norm for people. So it is part of the world. So why not treat orchestra as,
Right, right. Like
yeah,
everything you're saying, many people have those kinds of experiences in any workplace you
right,
can imagine. I think that yes, we want to think that music is different. That right.
right,
Everyone has to prove
yeah,
themselves, and it's
exactly,
only music and all that. And then it
mhm,
turns out it isn't always
yeah.
just about.
And
But yeah,
a lot of times in orchestra, people try to uh, sweep it under the rug or say it was a joke, or make an excuse. But if it were another job, I would take you to HR. So it
well,
shouldn't be different.
yeah, and in a, you know, certainly in an American orchestra, you absolutely take it to HR, you know,
Yeah.
and it was,
Hmm.
you know, people, I guess in the 90s, it changes by the decade, but back then it was sort of the early days of sexual harassment. So that those cases were taken, you know, some brass
Right.
makes a
Hmm.
raunchy joke, and you know, a woman in the brass section is like, this isn't cool, I don't like this, you know, and that was new.
Right.
And I think
Hmm.
now we're all used, now it's been 30 years, you know, since Anita Hill, and now that's normal. And I guess
Right.
I have a hope that that kind of thing is going to, it takes, you know, time to kind of generation after generation to learn and get it.
Mm.
Um,
Exactly. But I
yeah,
wonder for community orchestras, luckily nothing like that has happened to me in GBO. But sometimes there are community orchestras and someone says something really terrible, but then you find out they're like a really close friend of the conductor and they won't do anything about it, for example. So I don't know. I always wonder about that.
right. Or pickup gigs, I would think would be, although if
Right.
it's union, then you could sort of go to the union rep or something. But
Hmm.
right, I think in our orchestra, right, it's a constant, you know, balance, as I mentioned when we were all chatting before, between I think I like to treat us professionally in terms of how I respect everyone's time. You know, I don't stay 20 minutes after the end, you know, and we joke about, you know, getting overtime and all that if I go 3 minutes over, but I maintain my own professional standards. But obviously we don't have situations like that. Whenever we've had problems, and we have, I can't think of anything related to race. You know, I thought about it earlier today, and I thought, no, I don't ever remember that specifically. But when there have been issues, someone says, "Why am I on the third stand?" They just come to me and we
Right.
talk about it, work it out. It's not always easy. It's messy, you know. So
Hmm.
that's kind of how we do things. I think in terms, and this will go over into what Sam is going to talk about, but you know, what I struggle with is that classical music has always had cliques, you know, I mean, at least in our lifetimes, right? I mean, the history of classical music is what it is. It came from Europe, you know, if we if I want to measure it
Right.
from Bach or whatever, you know, that's the history of it. And it was obviously a
Yeah.
super elite art in those days, and in terms of both, mostly in terms of the audience back then, but I don't think the musicians were treated like an elite bunch, you know, in Mozart's day or whoever. But they needed the prince to give them money, and then it got a little better. You got to get paid for your compositions, etc. But I think
Yeah.
that I don't want to throw away that history. I think it is what it is, but and not I don't mean that in the horrible way it can sound, but I think it's part of what we love about the art. It's a one narrow type of music, right? There's, like you just said, there's lots of genres, and even within that narrow, there were the early music geeks. There's the contemporary music.
Right.
You know, there's always been these different things. How do we, you know, I guess I always flinch if someone says, well, it's racist because it came from, you know, white Europeans, but that doesn't make sense for me. How do you
Right.
feel about
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure the people who, well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but there are people who created this music in history who were racist. So if people want to say it's racist for that reason, then sure, I agree. But I'm right now, we can learn whatever we want, and I can learn I can learn how to play baroque music really well. I have the education. I, me as an example, but someone can have
right?
the education. Um, so the question of being able to play it based on background is irrelevant as long as you have the means to do it. I mean, yeah, I don't really know how to answer that. I mean,
Right. Well, I guess it's a setup, I guess, because I think that, you know, yeah, if we start going into what kinds of people these guys were, I mean, Beethoven was a raging anti-Semite. You know, does that mean I can't
right,
love Beethoven? You know, so we can't apply our current world to some of these guys from 100 years. We just
Exactly.
can't. We can't. But
Yeah.
we're going with their artworks and understanding them and letting them gain meaning at different times in our lives. Even
Hmm.
that way. I think what I'm saying is that it's really important to zoom out a little bit and say there's all these different kinds of music. This is one particular type of music. Rock and roll developed another way. It's those guys get paid way more than any of us. It's like, there's a whole bunch of ways of seeing it, and I think that separating kind of a musician's path, which is what you're going through, also versus uh, the audience and who we're appealing to. And,
Hmm.
I read a statistic that 33% of Germans love classical music, 10% of Americans do. There's something like 83 million people in Germany, and I wrote this down actually. 100 and let's see, there's 130 publicly funded orchestras, 80 permanent opera companies, and billions of euros are sent into their funding. It's that's their world, and they perpetuate. It's a chicken and egg thing because
Right.
they support the arts so much. So of course more people love the art, though this particular art, and
Hmm.
also they have incredible, big bands and everything too over there. But it has never been totally part of American culture, is what I'm trying to say. And
Right.
it's a little sliver of American culture. It's a part, and we in the classical music biz are sort of missionaries and are always bringing it out and saying, but listen, it's really great. You don't have to be in a fancy dress, and you don't have, and can I just move you with this music. So I think that that's been going on certainly since I'm in the profession. It's just that more recently things are seen as really divisive, and I think your
Hmm.
experience as a professional is a whole world. How do we reach the audience? That's a whole nother world.
Exactly. Yeah. And people,
Yeah.
how do people forget about, because it's easy for us to forget about involving the audience when we are so dedicated to uh, this art form that's not really as not widely accepted, but as widely appreciated in America, I think.
Right. And it
So
changes.
that's where we're coming in and we're saying,
Yeah,
sorry, go.
just like being out of the schools and all that. This has been going on a long time. It's the public funding in this country for music teachers and music. Almost no public school has a full-time music teacher anymore. Whereas when I
Right.
was 5, the only reason I started playing piano is because the music teacher at my school saw that I had figured out, was playing every day for my kindergarten class and said that kid should have piano lessons. That wouldn't happen now because there isn't a music
Hmm.
teacher to say that. Um, one
Yeah.
more thought on that, which is that about something we chatted about with auditions. So I looked it up. Um, in Germany, anyway, I don't know how France is. Germany, they don't really use screens. But here and some people are saying we should get rid of the screen in America, but you were saying something I also believe, which is we should leave the screen up to the end.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
maybe
I
say
think
something about that.
I really think we should leave the screen up to the end because, as I was telling you before, I know people who they pass the first, second, maybe even third round with auditions, and if there's a fourth or for the final round, they're suddenly not the right fit, but they don't really have a good reason as to why. And I mean, yeah, this usually I'm sure it's because of discrimination. And these they're black or they're people of color, they're women, you know, and the person who wins the audition in those cases is usually the white male. I mean, I'm not saying that they necessarily weren't as good, but it's just too frequent and strange,
It's
and
a
it happens a
brutal,
lot.
yeah, it's such a brutal process, the audition
Hmm.
process, and I don't think anyone's really figured out how to do it right. But um, I personally think there should be fewer orchestral excerpts and more just music. So you see how somebody plays music, not, oh my God, they missed that shift in Don Juan, let's throw them out. It just becomes very athletic and very technical. But I do believe that for the sake of an orchestra, you want the best person you can find. and probably leaving the screen up is going to do that. The only, like I said the other day, one of the dangers is if some guy, if the first flute from New York decides to audition for Boston, he may get that job, and they may only have him for 5 years before he retires, and then they're stuck paying his pension, and that's how the orchestras go broke. So there are some issues that I don't know how to resolve, and no one does.
Yeah, exactly.
The
And
Met
I know.
is behind a screen to the end. I think they're in the pit the whole way through.
Okay. Yeah, I know a lot of, or maybe all, I don't know, but many orchestras want to have an interview before they choose the winner of the audition. So I don't know how that would happen fairly, but yeah.
Right, but in some ways, right. And just to take their side for a minute is, you get an orchestra and you get tenure, you're there, and if you're a really difficult, weird person, you're probably going to not end up getting along with the guys in your section, and you may not get tenure anyway. There's all these,
Right.
like any job, it's always probationary anyway for the first year. But yeah, I really flinch when people say, oh no, there should be no screen, and we should automatically, I just think it's so insulting to a musician of color to say, we're going to take you because we need more Black people in our orchestra.
Yeah.
I'm gonna chime in just with Jeff's question in the chat. Jeff says, who can get to the screen, which I think is a fair point. And Jasmine, I would love to hear you talk about who can get to the screen, the resume round or whatever else.
I'm not sure I understand.
I mean, how do you get invited to an audition?
Oh.
He's asking. How do you get to the preliminaries, which is sometimes a tape or sometimes a resume?
Right, yeah. I mean, if it's a tape, it should be blind as well. It should just be an audio recording, I think. But if there's a resume, I mean, it's hard because usually they look at schools and a bunch of festivals, and which require money. So that I don't really know what to say about that, but I feel like it should be blind as long as you can, as long as it's possible.
Right. I believe in Germany they almost never ask for tapes, but I'm not sure. But yeah, if it says on their resume, I'm second clarinet in the Berlin Philharmonic, yeah, they're going to say, come on into the audition. Like they do it that way. But that world is very different too, in that it's not like a little select committee. The section of the instrument that is being auditioned for judges, and then you play for the whole orchestra. So I know we want Sam to start talking about repertoire. So thanks for talking about that stuff. Next, Sam.
Thank you, Barbara. So since you stole one of my questions, I was going to talk about the screen and the curtain, but we've exhausted that topic, I think. I'm going to take one of yours that I think I actually put in this section. Jasmine, I want to get a little bit on your opinion about how we can be more inclusive as an orchestra during the pandemic. I think the topic has come up that there's things that we can do. I know in the chat we had as this panel a few days ago that, a big important step is getting into the schools and getting access to classical music and instruments at a young age. But that's really hard right now in this digital age we're living in. So if there's any steps you think we can take right now as an orchestra virtually, we'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, are you talking about specifically getting people playing music or seeing your events?
Both aspects, right? Like from a programming perspective, performing music, inclusion of people of color in the orchestra, both playing and also audience members.
Yeah. So I mean, one thing that a lot of people have been talking about in general, but I really agree with, is programming Black composers of color, because a lot of times, I know I personally have seen a program of just let's say it's all French music or all something or all white composers, and I just don't want to see it because it sounds bad, but it's just it's it just happens too frequently, and no matter what we say, people don't listen. Like there are schools right now who have formed whole committees on race and diversity and inclusion, and then the program for next season doesn't have any Black composers. So yeah, I'm getting emotional about it, but yeah, I think that's really important. And also, if there's any way that people can donate to kids, I don't know, like if people have old instruments, maybe they can, and if they can afford to have them repaired and donated, that's a possibility too. Having free concerts online, or even if it's a soloist, I think that would help a lot. And for the performers to be of different backgrounds.
Yeah, definitely agree. Thank you for that. You talked a little bit about programming, and you said having more Black composers on the program. Is there a specific guideline that you follow when it comes to programming concerts? Like you said, you don't want a program of all French white composers, right? And if so, what are the things that you take into consideration? I know one thing we've talked about as a committee is the balance of, as Barbara alluded to, the history of classical music, and also bringing in the new history that we're forming right now of classical music.
Wait, sorry, I missed the last few words. Would you mind repeating?
Yeah. So I guess like the balance between acknowledging the history of classical music and what it is, where it came from Europe, and now essentially integrating it into this mindset of being more inclusive, right? So when it comes to programming, what's the guideline that you follow?
Yeah, so usually, like I know for school, students have standard rep that they are required to perform. So I wouldn't cut that out completely if that's if it's a recital or a required concert or something like that. I would probably try to find who those composers have studied with or have taught. Sometimes you can find a person of color, and there are famous composers who were taught by Black people, and of course they didn't receive recognition. Or if you have like free reign for your program, just just searching on Google.
Yeah.
And check on the Google. I mean, I'm sure you already do. I'm not talking to you.
And doing your research. I mean, I think it was recently popularized that the Kreutzer Sonata that Beethoven wrote was actually for a violinist named by the name of Bridgetower. And that was just kind of buried in history, and then it came back up this summer. So it's like, I guess, doing your research on that and having accurate historical information is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Because you'll never know what you'll find.
Right.
But I mean, just other small ways you can pick a country and see who the composers are there. Yeah, and I know when I was in college, my teacher always wanted me to choose a piece from different eras, so like baroque, romantic, contemporary. So if I could, usually it would be for the contemporary era, I would find someone of color more easily. But I would take that same approach, and instead of doing different eras, I would just choose different inspirations of genres. So like still classical, but like if a composer is inspired by like samba or African spirituals, something like that, I think is good to do.
Awesome. All great suggestions. Thank you. And then you alluded to it previously in your other conversations, but Americans tend to have like a tokenization mentality when it comes to Black performers. I know you said there's like the few spots and like the same like 5 people just get all the attention, right? And so that's something that you're trying to combat with Black classical music educators, highlighting them and giving them the platform and the attention that they deserve. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you think we as individuals, as an orchestra, can continue to combat that mentality?
Right. I think that mentality kind of stems from like what Barbara mentioned, trying to fill a quota of just like having black composers, or I need more black musicians, and that's not the way to approach things at all, in my opinion. And usually when you can tell when a group has that mentality because they find the most well-known person they can. So it takes them 2 minutes and then they call them up and that's the black person they have for the next concert. And I'm usually they're always, no, they are always talented, of course. It's nothing to do, it's not a bad reflection on the performer, it's a bad reflection of the ensemble.
Yeah.
Because they're not really putting in any work. They just heard the name and that they're black. So they hired them so that they can receive more ticket sales, or I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm just being very direct because this is how it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it is how it is. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so you're saying as an organization, we've got to put in the work to find the other good black artists to highlight and feature, other than the same 5 that keep getting all the work.
Right. Put in more work to find them, but also don't ignore the ones that come to you because a lot of people are ignored. Yeah, maybe there's an audition, someone auditions and they're not the best, so you may not be able to hire them for something, but you can hire them for something else because there are many white people who are in orchestras that may not be able to play everything, but they still have the job.
Right. Yeah. Or keep them for next year as they improve, like just
exactly.
toss them aside just because at this point in time they weren't totally ready. Yeah.
Exactly. Like you can say, oh, I really love this person's orchestral playing, but as a soloist, maybe not, or something, for example.
Gotcha. Awesome. So at this time, I think we have some time for questions from the audience. Looks like Jason just sent one in. That was good timing, Jason. So we can take.
I also would love to butt in with a question because I feel like we've been kind of trying to tie things back a little bit, but I feel like we've been skirting around the topic of access a lot. Like I think we've been hinting at access and the role that access to classical music has kind of shaped your opportunities. And I think that one big thing that you're trying to do right now is create greater access for young black musicians to get into this world more. And for me, like access has meant somebody telling me about the Manhattan School of Music summer camp. And I literally don't think I would be a professional musician right now if I hadn't attended that summer camp. And it was just a stranger that had never met me before, knew I played music. And that's how I found out. And so I'm just kind of wondering, I'll tell you about her. She's great. But I was wondering if there are any moments like that you've had in your life where access has just, how is access, what have people opened up for you? And because I feel like one thing that we struggle with a lot is this kind of idea of access, but there's real ways that people provide access to other people all the time. So.
Right. Yeah. So you're asking how I had access or what?
Yeah, either stories. Yeah, I think your experiences with access that's been granted to you.
Yeah. Well, I distinctly remember first learning about summer festivals with James, my undergrad teacher. He told me to audition for Domaine, and he had no connection with it at all. Like he went there as a student, but he wasn't part of the jury or anything. He just suggested that I audition, and I did get in, but if it weren't for that, I wouldn't have even known what a summer festival was. I just thought that everyone was really good because they were good. They practiced a lot. They went to school just like I did, but nothing else. Like no festivals, no pre-college, nothing besides school. So that really helped a lot and, opened a lot of doors because I met the people who were teaching at the festivals and also the participants, some of them who were younger than me and much stronger players than I was. And I learned from them and I realized what other schools were doing also. But yeah, I would have never known about that.
Yeah.
And also, I was going to say something that we talked about when we had our meeting for this panel. It takes money too. Like those festivals cost a lot of money. So
Right.
like the funds to be able to get there is also necessary.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, go ahead. Well, I was just going to jump in
Sorry.
with one small story from our days at Washington Irving that this wonderful music teacher, Kazi McCoy, showed me. And I went to some of those classes, and we were really able to, we're a community orchestra, but I feel like if orchestras could partner with schools the way we tried to partner with them, it would be a huge thing, because
Hmm.
kids came in and watched our rehearsals. Everyone was allowed to come for free. We put kids in our orchestra whenever we could, etc. But what stays with me is the day Kazi showed me boxes of clarinets they were sent with no mouthpieces. And they were like, how does this help me? How can I, there's no mouthpieces on these clarinets,
Right.
so just people getting, sort of like getting the old beat up textbooks, it's a completely economic, socioeconomic kind of level.
Right. And that's why I think it's really important. Like I said to Sam, if someone has an old instrument laying around at home and they can afford to have it repaired, that's
Yeah.
when they should donate it, I think.
Cool. I think
Alrighty, so we have a few questions in the chat. So we'll start with Jason's question. Jason asked, over your career in classical music, have you seen changes in representation in organizations that you've worked with? If so, what changes, positive or negative, have you observed?
Yeah, I've seen changes in hiring practices, just having more people in orchestras and ensembles who are Black and or of color, and a little bit more with the administration. I think that's really important, because administrators are making the decisions for the ensembles, and if there's nobody representing other backgrounds, decisions are made mostly in a performative manner. So that could be a negative. So the positive is hiring people of different backgrounds, and the negative is the risk of it being performative. And I feel like especially right now that's happening a lot. And so an example of that is people is ensembles having people be the face of the ensemble, but not really listening to what they need, or kind of brushing them off if they have a complaint, or not even a complaint, a request. So that's an example of being performative and a negative.
Yeah. I was actually just going to follow up with Kelly's question, but it looks like she said you just answered it, because she said, have you felt that the recent increased focus on diversity in classical music led to actually real change? But it sounds like it kind of goes back to like tokenization and just using it for a performative aspect rather than actually trying to make a difference.
Right. I think we won't know for sure also until things kind of get better with the pandemic and
Absolutely.
we're back in together.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think one thing that we mentioned a couple days ago was like the pause that we're on right now, where everyone has the time to focus on this and really think deeply on this with the pandemic. I think the coinciding of the George Floyd protests and the pandemic really gave it all the attention that it deserves and more. And we got to keep that going when the pandemic is over and people's busy lives start up again. And like you said, it's like it will tell once we're back to our normal life, if these actually have lasting impacts.
Exactly.
Audrey dropped a question in the chat. She wants to know how you ended up in France.
Because of my husband. Got married in October, but I'm also planning to, and I got my visa just last month, so now I'm planning to find some work, but that won't happen until a little later, I guess, with the pandemic. But I'm currently studying with an oboist, and I just hope things will progress, but yeah.
Awesome. If there's not any more questions, Cindy, do you want to take it up and wrap it up?
Sure. Thanks for
one thing. I just,
Yeah.
I love, I just love that idea when you're talking about repertoire of, you know, not making this sort of, I don't know, you know, categorizing, oh, we're going to do the black composer, you know, but saying
Yeah.
it's sort of like, you know, composers love to do Spanish music. So then you can do Ravel and you can do Albanese and, you know, something influenced by Spanish culture or rhythms and modes. And by, you know, going that way and saying, hey,
Exactly.
let's do music with Brazilian rhythms or whatever you want. And let's just find really
Yeah.
good music and make sure we have to look harder for music by black composers. Like I found, you know, we played music by George Walker and Florence Price over our pandemic time. And it was like a revelation to me. Like these are fantastic composers. You know, I didn't feel like they were particularly any ethnicity. They were very, very good composers. And Florence Price might use a little more, I don't know, you know, scenic things that could be associated with her life or whatever. But George Walker, certainly, there's nothing, he's like Sam Barber, basically. He just happened to be black. And I think it's really, you know, I know I'm kind of a child of the 70s, 60s, whatever. I kind of want to just treat music in a purely musical way, but also make it really relevant to who we are as people. And I
Right.
consider myself connected to George Walker and Florence Price. You know, they're Americans. They're people that I can
Exactly.
you know. So thank you for that idea.
Yeah. Thank you. And also, yeah, I wanted to add to that. I was at Eastman. I was playing a contemporary concert with a group called Musica Nova, and we were playing a piece. It just happened to fit really well with the program, and it was by a black composer. And people are just so not used to that someone asked me, "Oh, you're playing," or said, "You're playing a black composer right now. It's not even Black History Month," as if that's the only time we're supposed to play music by black composers, and it had nothing to do with that. It's a great piece.
What was the piece?
It's by what was the piece?
The George Lewis one?
I can't remember. Yeah, the George Lewis one.
Okay. Yeah. I just
George
always
Lewis,
wanna hear-
great contemporary composer. Yeah.
If someone mentions a good piece, I just want to know what it is.
Yeah.
That's great.
He wrote a lot of great music. So George Lewis.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll give you one. I didn't want to go into the whole woman conductor thing, but I once did a run out into the rural parts of Pennsylvania, and they told the people there that the conductor would be Barbara Yahr, and the question was, "That's an odd name for a man," you know. So that's
Oh my God.
that's how it was just 20, 30 years ago. Anyway.
Yeah.
Just gotta laugh. I don't know. I
Yeah.
laugh. Cindy.
Well, thanks, Jasmine. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us and sharing some of your thoughts. Do you have anything that you want to drop again or talk about before we head out?
Do you mean like BCME?
Sure, if you want.
Okay.
Give us-
Well,
I know we talked about
Give us
that
your
already.
website again.
It's blackclassicalmusiceducators.com.
Let's stay in
Cool.
touch.
Well, thank you for having me.
You know, let's keep this being an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
I would love that.
Me too.
Thank you. This was fabulous.